All right, guys, listen up. Today is going to be the theory of knowledge talk that it concerns the cross-curriculum project. The reason why we're covering theory of knowledge is theory of knowledge in the IB program, very specifically, is cross-curricular. We spend almost every time we have a conversation about theory of knowledge through the theory of knowledge lens, we talk cross-curricular. We talk about the connections between math and science. We talk about the connections between science and history. Talk about the connection between history and arts, maybe the arts and religious knowledge systems, etc. So what we talk about today, I'm going to give you the foundations of something that takes some kids 2 years to understand. But in less than 40 minutes maybe, I'm going to give you the foundation and fundamentals of the language and the way of thinking that we're going to need to do for you guys to bring your ideas together as a group and the ideas concerning different areas of knowledge together in an answer. Remember, answer. We're not really necessarily looking for the right answer. We're looking for possible answers in this project. So when we start off, I'm going to need one of you to read what theory of knowledge is for me on the front of that packet that that handout that I gave you.
Theory of knowledge is a product of doubt. When we have asked ourselves seriously whether we really know anything at all, we are naturally led into an examination of knowing, in the hope of being able to distinguish trustworthy beliefs from such as are trustworthy. The definition of knowledge at first sight might be the thought that knowledge might be defined as belief which is in our agreement with the facts. The trouble is that no one knows what a belief is. No one knows what a fact is. No one knows what sort of agreement between them would make a true belief.
With your fancy iPens and Android pens, super technological pencils that you have in your possession, all right, underline that last sentence. All right, access your Ink app, apply it. You didn't? No, you did not follow the rules. Underline that last sentence. I just want you for the next 30 seconds to keep reading that sentence and think about the consequences of it. Think about the implications. This sentence gets to the heart of what we come to understand as theory of knowledge. And it breaks traditions in academics that many people are uncomfortable with. When I tell you that no one knows what a fact is, that should make some people upset, confuse some people, but it also might make some people very comfortable, because some people navigate this world with a lot of uncertainty. So when they say not really, the facts aren't real sometimes, that should feel comfortable for some people, all right? But what we're getting to here is the idea that we are going to question knowledge. What you underlined is called knowledge claim. Someone is claiming that that is true, that no one knows what a fact is. Now, some of you right away are skeptics. Of course, I know what a fact is. I get told facts all day long. I go to math class and they give me facts, and history class and they give me facts, and even my language arts teacher tells me that this is a metaphor, all right? I can tell you the definitive moment where my mind was changed as far as this was concerned. 4 years ago, I went into Mr. Gilmore's IB math class, and in the entire, back then it was trimesters, in the entire 72 minutes, they talked about one problem. They didn't math one problem. Eventually, math ended up on the board, but they talked about one problem. And they talked about numbers and numbers relationships and what they mean and how they work and so on and so forth. And here was their conclusion. And every single one of the students in that classroom could have told you that at that point, that was a fact. Who says this? Raise your hand if this is what you've been taught. This is the fact that you learned in math class. Someone tell me why it isn't true.
It's a system of mathematics that we have derived after centuries of development states that 1 does not equal 7, 1 equals 1.
Good, good. Does one exist, Robert?
Well, here's my thinking. You have what
I
we
think
think
busted
of as-
out like a model already.
We think of-
Here's what I'm thinking. These models I put together last night in anticipation of the question you were going to ask.
these two, or these items,
Right.
if we're going to operate off that logic, there are, like, near enough makes a difference for the purposes of this. These are identical items. So, if it's not, okay, so we could name the term anything we want to for, like, if the
Let's call those ones. Those are ones. You have two ones in your hand.
and two ones would not make another one, or it's, and if the series of progression that we've developed states that if you have
Robert,
I'm trying to think of
no,
alternate-
Robert, is one real? Does one exist?
One exists.
Okay. Anybody seen the whole Fault in Our Stars? Yeah, who's like right at look at all the girls and all the guys are like, no, I haven't seen it. You're lying. You saw it. You and your boys Netflixed it. You told everybody you weren't going to tell anyone that you Netflixed Fault in Our Stars. Like they all sat around, like, hey, you want to come over for football? And you got there and one dude was like, hey, have you guys seen Fault in the Stars yet? They're like, no one leaves this basement and says anything about this. All right. So in that, she says, some infinities are bigger than others. Almost every mathematician in contemporary society will tell you that from here to here, I'm going to try this again as far as drawing an infinity. Last time I drew it, it looked like a mutated Jesus fish. That's not much better. All right, but anyway, most mathematicians will tell you that on any given number line, there is no definitive end or beginning. You can have 0.000000 forever and ever and ever, ever, ever one. And that still is not the beginning. And if every single number or integer can be broken up into an infinity, the distance between 1 and 2 is infinity, making the distance between 2 and 3 infinity. And if you add those two infinities up, that is also an infinity, making this infinity bigger than that infinity. Making this arbitrary and not necessarily real. It's really just a placeholder for an abstract concept that we've used to quantify observations in our universe. And it is convenient, right? Because if we thought in this way, we would never be able to figure out how much to pay for our McDonald's, right? So you mean infinity 4.85 cents? Is that what you mean? All right. So what this means is we need to start questioning the knowledge that we're being handed. The question I gave you guys is how important is conforming or not conforming in our world, and how do you know? Really quickly, just super quick. Right under that, there's a little blank space. Make a knowledge claim. Make a knowledge claim. I want you to claim something to be true about that question. You can say, I know conformity is this. I know nonconformity is this. Or some other claim. Make a claim. Something you know about this question. Ten seconds to finish. We're not going to talk about it. You're not going to share it with me. I don't really care what you wrote down. What I'm interested to see at the end of the semester and you're done with the project, when you and your group get together and you look at the knowledge claims on this, do you still feel it's true? And when we come to the very end of today's talk and we talk about the blurs and how we look at knowledge, all right, we'll take a look at limitations in our knowledge and how we sometimes find what we're looking for. So you've made a claim very, very early in the process. I'm interested to see if that claim holds true when you're done with the project. But what I more importantly want to talk about is the question right after. And that's our theory of knowledge question that drives almost every conversation that we have in TOK. Not explicitly, we don't just repeat this question over and over again anytime someone says something. That'd be awful. But what we do is we get to the heart of this question almost every time. And that question is, what do we mean when we say we know, and why should anyone believe us? So that's the question I want you guys to start asking in all your classes, in the conversations with your parents, as you watch the news. Because for this cross-curriculum project, when you present answers to conformity versus non-conformity, you want to have some sort of justification for why you're saying this is why conformity or how conformity is important. Because the second part of that question is, how do we know? So when you go into math class and someone says this is the, how do they know? How does your math teacher know this is true? Why do they say that it's true? In your history class, if someone gives you a historical fact, what do they mean? They say that they know this is true, and why should you believe your history teacher when they tell you this historical fact? That crosses all of human condition experiences. So whether your parents are telling you something, or your friend is telling you something, or the internet's telling you something, you should be asking those questions. This is what's going to bring your cross-curriculum project together, all right? The idea, the underlying understanding of how all knowledge works. Whether we call that knowledge mathematics or history or science, it doesn't matter, because we can break it down and zoom out far enough to make a connection between everything we claim to be true. And we'll work on that a little bit today, all right? So let's take a look at the terms we want to define. Someone tell me what they think a knowledge claim is based on what we've talked about so far. So in that left-hand column of the chart, we have knowledge claim right at the top. Someone tell me what they think a knowledge claim is. Go.
Something that they claim to know.
Yeah, something you claim to know. It's that simple. Anytime someone makes a statement, all right? I'm really going to mess with you later when I tell you, even when someone asks a question, they're making a knowledge claim, because there's knowledge behind questions as well. So that one's easy. The next one's tough, and we're going to bounce around this handout a little bit to keep it more dynamic. All right? What do we think knowledge question is? Charlie.
A question asked in order to gain knowledge.
Okay, that's one aspect. So he said, and everybody's writing this, right? He said a question that's asked in order to gain knowledge. All right? That could be an aspect of it. We're gonna tweak that a little bit, though. Labby, go ahead.
Question asked like based on the knowledge you previously know.
Okay, so using your knowledge, you're questioning something else. Go ahead.
Questions and reliability.
Yeah, we're getting a little closer there. Did everybody hear his? Nice and loud. Use your big boy voice.
Questions and reliability.
That is your big boy voice? Come on, pull your pants up!
Questions the reliability of information.
It questions the reliability of information. So what we're really talking about here is questioning the knowledge. It's pretty simple. It's right there in the title of it. We're questioning the knowledge behind any statement and or question that's being asked. Getting to the heart of it. This is where we're going to bounce around a little bit. Flip it over. On the back, we have, underneath this chart that we may or may not come back to, all right? We have examples of knowledge questions. It says you can find knowledge questions underlying almost any issue. They are sometimes difficult to formulate precisely, but they often lurk underneath popular and often controversial subjects that are discussed in the media. For example, it is a very useful exercise to try and tease out knowledge questions underlying articles in the media. So, articles you read or newscasts that you hear. So here's an example of a topic that was in the newspaper relatively recently, and it has to do with future population growth in Africa. So in the article, they had models of future population growth. They had charts that tried to predict what the population in Africa would be in the future. So I'm going to start by telling you what's not a knowledge question. What's not a knowledge question is, how can we predict future population growth in Africa? Well, I can kind of come up with a definitive answer for that, right? I can come up with, well, what we'll do is we'll take a census and we'll count people, and then we'll count them the next year, and then we'll come up with a model that extrapolates information from that census and adds it to the next and taking into other variables. There's ways you can do that. I can answer that question, but it's too specific to the issue. I actually use the term Africa, all right? Now you could ask knowledge questions from there, but here's what a good knowledge question from that would be. How can a mathematical model give us knowledge even if it does not yield accurate predictions? Notice it mentions nothing about Africa. What it's questioning is the processes and how we come to knowledge behind the issue of predicting something using mathematics. So on any sort of mathematical predicting model, there's always outliers. And every mathematician knows it, and most mathematicians ignore it. They look at when they plot their data out, and they're like, look at this trend! And you're like, what's that one up there? And you're like, just don't look at that one! All right, look at the trend! All right, this is what's going to happen. All right? So if a mathematical model isn't accurate, when I say accurate, accurate means 100%, right? So if mathematical models innately are not 100% accurate when they predict things, then how can a mathematical model ever predict anything? So what I'm doing is I'm questioning the knowledge behind the issue. I'm questioning the knowledge behind the claim that we can even begin to use something like mathematics to predict, given the models that we have, or even any models in the future. So I'm going to have you guys work on one here for a second, all right? In a second, there's someone next to you. You're going to talk to them about this next one. The next one has to do with the flu vaccine. Last year at some point, the health organization, the World Health Organization, came out and said, hey, you know how we really encouraged you guys to get flu shots? So it turns out that the flu virus changed. None of those work at all. At all. Did you no good. We're developing something that will work, and when you get that, it should help, but our scientists are working hard at it. So here's the knowledge question I came from that article. When some observation can become invalid in natural science, how can we be certain in our knowledge of any scientific evidence? So with someone next to you, I want you to talk about how did I get from the flu vaccine failing to this question? Go. Just 1 minute. Go.
Well, the fact that their scientists worked hard on their flu vaccine as well, and then that one was mistaken. So it questions the future connections there, because if the flu has evolved, changed, this is the kind of stuff
Okay, how do we get there? I want to hear from some of Warner's kids. I love you, Charlie, but I'm sick of your voice. I'm kidding, no. You can participate in a second. Come on, some of Warner's kids. I know that you already started a detriment because you have him as a teacher, but let's try and get you caught up, all right? I mean, I'm sure right now he's like in his room trying to figure out how to do the reel-to-reel so he can show you another video. Right, go ahead.
Lisa, how did this valid natural science statement that came out prove that it was then invalid? Like, how did we know before that it was already proven correct?
Valid, right?
Yeah.
So we just had the assumption that the validity of the observation of the flu virus led to the vaccine in an effective way. Good, very good. Someone else? Go ahead.
And also, if you hear someone like get it wrong the first time, then already the like authority of that person is compromised. So you have to ask, why is your knowledge more important? And like, why are you valid and not someone else? So
Good.
what's different about your thoughts?
Good. Go ahead.
Yeah, like going off what Mike said, it's not like when they created the first vaccine, they had a crew of trained monkeys working on it. Those same scientists worked very hard and used the same instruments to discover that, to come up with that first vaccine, and then that one was invalid. So yes, they can work hard and they can produce another vaccine, but the flu is just as likely to evolve again, or evolve more, or just be impervious to the vaccine. So there's still just as good a chance that the next one won't be as effective because the others have become ineffective.
Such a fascinating topic to me, the idea of how we are waging war against microbiology and they are evolving and figuring things out way faster than we are. And we consider them not like sentient beings, right? These microscopic bacteria will just take a pill and everything's fine. And they like have rallied and created superbugs amongst themselves. And we can't keep up with them. So when we get back to the actual question, if one scientific proven theory or fact has now become invalid, right? We could talk about Copernicus, because that's what you guys are covering in honors history, right? The world is flat, and we are at the center of the universe, right? And then all of a sudden, we're not, right? Imagine if, like, now when I put doubt in your brains, your guys' generation is pretty critical, and that's fantastic. So when I give you ideas like that, you're like, you think about it, that could be true, and I'll mull that over. But imagine in a world where you just accepted things readily from a scientific community that was infallible, and then all of a sudden what they told you is not true. And then even not even from the scientific community, like your religious knowledge system told you, you're super special. And God loves you, and he put you at the center of the universe, and there's a plan. And then someone came out and was like, actually we observed that we're like actually pretty off-center from the universe, and we're one of among a billion solar systems and quadrillion planets, and there's probably life out there somewhere. So you're not special, right? Like that probably rocked people's world to a certain degree, right? Your whole idea of your existence could be shattered. So when we look at like how, if that isn't true anymore, what other scientific knowledge that's claimed to be true, how do we know that's valid as well if it's gone through the same processes, all right? So that's how we get to knowledge questions. I still struggle with knowledge questions. My seniors still struggle with knowledge questions. Some of the people I did my training with still struggle with knowledge questions. They're hard to tease out and it's trial and error, but what we're asking you guys to do is anytime you come across a claim about conformity or nonconformity or a historical fact that relates to conformity or whatever the case may be, to try and come up with a knowledge question that gets to the heart behind the issue of what's being claimed to be true. Flip it back over. We're going to talk about personal and shared knowledge, all right? Someone tell me what they think personal knowledge is. Go ahead.
Would personal knowledge be knowledge gained based off your own experiences?
Perfect. Knowledge gained off of your personal experiences. And they hit that right away. So, when it comes to the idea of love, there's what you read in the poems that we give you. There's what you watch in the movies. And then there's your experiences with love. And we'll come back to the idea of language and the word of love a little bit later. But your personal knowledge, your experience in it, all right, interacts with what we call shared knowledge. Who thinks they have an idea of what shared knowledge is now? Go ahead.
Knowledge based on one another's experience and
Okay, we're getting there. So knowledge based on what others experience and then they share with you. But they could just be sharing personal knowledge. Now you guys share that knowledge, but does everybody else? Or is that just between you two? Go ahead.
Knowledge that you don't personally may have felt in the past or experienced, but everyone has a general consensus is true, even if they haven't experienced it.
Right, so a general consensus that is true. So when you go into history class and they say World War II happened, right? You're like the general consensus, okay, yeah, World War II happened. That's very different though than this area from some of your, God, it would probably be your guys' great-grandparents if they're still alive and were in World War II, right? That's very different from their experiences, all right, in World War II. You have facts and knowledge that the community has agreed upon to be true, has shared knowledge. They have personal experience. Now, Copernicus, if that big bubble of shared knowledge is the idea of the universe, right? His personal knowledge is right in there. There's big C, right? Because everything that he tested and experimented with and worked with mathematically and observed is a part of the shared knowledge that we all come to understand eventually. So our interaction between shared knowledge varies, right? You invent something totally new, and then you share it with the world. Your personal bubble is pretty integrated with the shared knowledge of the world, all right? If you're just a peruser of knowledge on a particular topic, right, it just might barely touch. You know, based on my personal knowledge and experience, I know a little bit of shared knowledge, but not a whole lot. Why is this important? What does this have to do with your cross-curriculum project? Back last Friday, I had you underline a couple things in your packet. Yeah?
So conformity has to do with like community and what people are doing, so that has to deal with directly with shared knowledge.
Right. Conformity, what people are doing, so there's shared knowledge. Good. Something else. Give me more. Yeah?
Maybe seeing it from different perspectives, because your personal knowledge is just your knowledge, and shared is just a general consensus.
Great job, Dalton. Exactly. So when I say answer this question from multi-dimensions and multi-perspectives, right? If these four are a group, their personal and shared knowledge of conformity and the arts and history all are different. Their interactions with it, you like a dancer or an artist? Yeah, dancer, right? I love how like you nodded your head as if you were asking me a question. Am I? Okay. So her knowledge of the arts as a dancer from her personal experience, she has an interaction with shared knowledge. She knows techniques, the shared knowledge shared to her by her instructor, etc. But she also has a lot of personal experience she brings to the table as far as dance and what it means to conform and not conform in dance. You know, I'm sure that there are times in your dance studio you guys are dancing together. And then there's times where the instructor maybe breaks the mold a little bit. All right, go ahead.
Isn't it like joining in on the shared knowledge and that kind of like conforming?
Yeah, right? I mean, there's some conformity that has to take place, right? Like there's some things that we should conform to, like what? Now, should and would, by the way, that's ethics as one of the areas of knowledge. So when I say should, it's like a ethical expectation or a moral expectation, but that is different between cultures and people as well. So we'll tread carefully. Give me something we should conform to. Yeah.
You should conform to the laws. You shouldn't kill people.
Right, you shouldn't kill people, maybe based on your ethical framework, not mine. I'm totally fine with killing people. But you might say, like, the way I was raised, my religious knowledge systems, the laws, because they're consequences, you should. Right, you'll go to jail, lose your freedom, or whatever. All right? Robert?
So, the stuff that we should conform to, it's the stuff that if we did not do, we would just be diving headfirst and into being obnoxious and going into semantics. So, it's like terminology, what we refer to items by. Granted, we haven't done that
right,
yet.
so if you call 1 1 and I call it an eraser, right, I'm just being obnoxious,
yeah,
right?
It's pointless to do that if, like, that item that we're both seeing, there's, because you make terms to call something what it is. So to deviate from that is just pointless.
So you're talking about efficiency in communication, right? The ability to communicate ideas between one person to another. It's important that we conform to the constraints of language. so that we both have at least a general understanding of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Other examples? What about breathing? Right, like you should conform to that, right? It's a really bad idea for you to be like, you know what? The rest of you are sheep. I'm gonna do what I want. So there's some things that make sense that you conform to. That's good. You guys are already bringing different perspectives and ideas and dimensions to the question. That it's not all cut and dry. This leads us exactly into where I want to go next. On the big handout we gave you next Friday, there's those launching questions that we ignored. I told you we'd come back to them today, and here we are. All right? I'm going to do something a little different with your class than I did the other class. I want you to read those questions to yourself real quick. Then I want comments or questions from you based on those questions. So on the very front of that packet it says launching questions and statements. This is just a way to get you started on how to think for this project. This is not questions that you have to answer for the project. So read and think. Okay, questions and comments about any other questions there, how to think about it, your opinion on it. Don't clam up now, people. Come on, we're doing so good. Doing so good. You can't be wrong, by the way. So that should help you in your confidence.
Conformity is not an all or nothing concept.
What?
Conformity is not an all or nothing concept.
It's not an all or nothing concept. Raise your hand if you agree with Robert. Conformity is not an all or nothing concept. What about breathing? What? I'm going to avoid that breathing question and ask my own. No, that's fine. Go ahead.
No, it is for breathing.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So we categorize that as being conformity to breathing.
Right.
But like when you're born, you do that without even seeing anyone do it. So if you're born with it, you don't know that it's going to happen.
Good. So we have to get to behind the knowledge of the concept of conformity. What my seniors do for their TOK essay, they're given a title or a question that they have to respond to in essay form. One of the first things we do is we define the concepts or the terminology or vocabulary within that question. So one of the first things they do is one of the first questions I ask you on the bullet point, I ask a question about the idea of importance. We can do the same thing with conformity, right? How do we framework conformity? How are we acknowledging conformity in its existence for what we're going to talk about? So some people can view conformity in the very basic sense that if you do what others are doing, you are conforming, whether it's behavior or thinking or dress or whatever. Some people will look at it a little less cut and dry, less black and white and a little more gray, and they'll say conforming is following the lines and actions and ideas or thought processes of others based on influence and peer pressure based on consequences, right? Because there's always consequences. Good, that was a good question. Someone else? Mm-hmm.
Going back to talking about is it an all or nothing concept, it kind of reminds me of like playing a game, for example, a racing game. Like you might have some nitro boost, which can help you get ahead.
I love where this is going already.
But this was just what popped into my head. But it's if you use it all at once, it doesn't always make sense. It might not be the best use of it. So if you used up all your conformity at once, or non-conformity at once, being non-conformity, not
Conforms.
conforming or conforming, you shouldn't always be one or the other, because if you always don't conform, then you're just like a weird dude who doesn't wear clothes and walks backward, and you can't function.
Holding their breath.
Yeah, while holding their breath. You can't function in a society. Whereas if you, in the same way, if you conform always, then you won't get anywhere in a society. You just exist entirely within the society. So you need to know how to conform enough to exist and be recognized, but at the same time, not conform at the right times based on what you want to be.
I love the idea that Charlie said about you have to conform to a certain degree to sort of exist in your society. So think about the nonconformists. Like if they were total wackadoodles, right? If Martin Luther King walked backwards holding his breath, naked, and preached about, nonviolent protests, no one's gonna listen to him because most of what he does is crazy, right? Good. You were gonna say something.
Oh, I mean, it was kind of already answered, but I was gonna ask, so we have to conform in certain ways in order to generally be alive. Because, so if parts of your body don't, conform to what they're all doing and work for their specific function, then your body isn't gonna work right. You're gonna be dead.
Right. So now what she's done is she's taken it to science and biology. So let's talk about molecular level. How important is conforming or non-conforming when it comes to molecular biology?
I feel like it's incredibly important, because the way that we approach science is you do an experiment and then you repeat the experiment a bajillion times, and then at that point scientists kind of accept that this experiment yields this result. So if the experiment doesn't yield this result every time, then there's going to be a big problem, because if you think about all the reactions going on inside your body at this given moment, and one of them goes wrong, and then in the next second, another one goes wrong, and then it just kind of compounds.
So if we come back to the flu vaccine idea, right? They're testing of it at the molecular level and its interactions. If it doesn't do the things they want, there could be major issues.
Yeah.
But you brought humans into it. I'm taking take the human element out of it. How important is nonconformity or conformity at the molecular level? What about the genetic level? Go ahead, you had a question.
Well, it wasn't really a question. It
Okay,
was,
go ahead.
Like what you said with the molecular level.
Mhm.
Sodium and chlorine are two very either explosive or poisonous gases. One of them is just solid. But
Right.
when you put them together, you can eat it and it's fine. But if those two, if you got the formula wrong, it can kill you.
Very good.
On the genetic level,
She's going. Don't cut. Then you'll go. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, biology, everything at the molecular level is so delicate and complex, and all these little parts working together, that if one small thing goes wrong, it could have a consequence that's much bigger, such as cancer, something that you could see, this every day without looking at the molecular level.
so on the genetic level, I believe that conformity is good, and it's sometimes non-conformity could be good, because in genetics, say a chromosome is missing, I guess that'd be considered non-conformity. It's not always gonna have a positive effect, and it can be really bad actually. But in other ways, genetically modified organisms, people do that for positive effects. So I guess it could go either way.
Yeah, mutations, right? We wouldn't have polar bears and giraffes, right? Essentially at one point there was a mutation in genetics and a white bear was born. And then they passed that genetics down, and it turns out that actually worked out really well if you lived in places where it snowed, right? I mean, poor horses would have never ate if they didn't keep growing longer necks to reach the trees. So to that effect, if we're going to come back to animal biology and mutation, it works that sense. Go ahead.
For genetics, how can we call it conformity, if we all look different?
Ooh. I don't know. I don't know the answers to any of these questions, but I like that question. Go ahead.
Well, to some extent, it's kind of how the first question we talked about. Is conformity all in or nothing concept, which we said was not. but that kind of answers it also, because to some extent you have to be, you have to have a certain amount of chromosomes, but even inside those chromosomes, everything's different. Not to the whole extent, but
Right.
to a certain extent, you have to be somewhat similar in order to be a functioning organism.
Oh God, wouldn't it be like a cool EE to like if you break everything down far enough, it's all the same,
It's
right?
almost no.
Like what makes up even atoms, like atoms are different, but what makes up atoms are the same, like quarks and subquarks. We've got it down even below that, where we're trying to kind of find the God particle. At what point does it differentiate? That'd be a cool investigation. Like at what point for the generation of life does conformity have to take place? Oh, that hurt my head. So like you're like all these little things are all the same, and they all come together and they start building things. At one point do they start building something different in order for life to exist? I mean, one thing that all biologists and evolutionists and scientists can tell you is like the margin of error for life to exist on our planet is literally microscopic. Like the conditions had to be perfect mathematically and temperature-wise and genetically for life, because at one point there was no life, and then 1 millisecond later or less there was. What happened at that moment, right? What got built different from all the things that are the same, and now all of a sudden it's different? The other couple questions that we didn't get to, the one about confidence, and I think the one about cultural identity. Guys, these are just me giving you different perspectives, all right? So one way to look at what affects my idea of conformity, well, personality traits and culture work into that. So confidence, sense of humor, those things maybe work into how you view conformity. Culture can be as small as the culture inside your own home, or as big as your ethnicity, all right? So you can view it from those different perspectives as well. Go back to the front side. I want to talk about ways of knowing super quickly, all right? We have debates in theory of knowledge about whether or not this list of ways of knowing is exhaustive. Some people have talked about, the idea of maybe sense of humor being on there as a way to process information in the world and categorize knowledge. But essentially what this is, and we do an activity with the juniors and seniors where we have them stand in a place in the room that represents the way of knowing they trust the most. And a lot of kids stand in memory and reason. They trust their reason over their emotions, or they trust their memory over their sense perception, as far as they bringing information into the brain and an ability to process it and think about it. One thing they all agree on is the fact that none of these work independently. That even reason itself at some point started as maybe intuition, and that the fundamentals of reason come from memory, and so on. The reason we give you this list for this particular cross-curriculum project is that once you find knowledge claims about conformity and nonconformity, and you put it in a category or an area of knowledge such as mathematics, then we have to start talking about the part of the question that says, how do you know? What did you experience through the different ways of knowing that told you that this thing was true? All right? So, I use my memory and sense perception when I can make the claim that this thing is real, right? But now really quickly I want to go over the blurs, because I want to talk about how the blurs interact with our ways of knowing and also with the knowledge that we think we know. So really quickly you're going to write this down. Blurs. B is for bias. L is for limitations. U is for uncertainty. R is for reliability. And S is for subjectivity. Now, there's some overlap with some of these. A lot of people view bias and subjectivity as relatively similar, right? So one thing, I'll talk about this from a couple different perspectives, just to give you an idea of how you use the blurs. The blurs is a way to critically think about anything that we claim to be true, all right? It's a way to navigate and be skeptical about knowledge. So if we take a look at ways of knowing, and we look at sense perception. You know, the idea of synesthesia, we didn't talk about that yet, right? Synesthesia, you guys, we covered it in Gatsby as a literary device, but it's an actual condition where people may be smelling color, all right? Or they hear music and see colors. They associate emotion with music at a visceral level, like that when they feel emotions, they actually hear music, if music is there or not, okay? Yeah.
I have my brother's friend. She's like in college or whatever, but she has that kind of thing, and when she sees numbers, they turn into different colors and they like move in her mind.
Yep. So think about that idea of sense perception, and what we legitimately now talk about when we talk about mental health and how people perceive the world, and their reality is different than others. They see things and they hear things that aren't there. So we're talking about the fallibility of the brain. In forensic science and the idea of our justice system, two people will be standing in almost the exact same spot and witness a crime and describe things very differently. So eyewitness testimonies are kind of not relied on as heavily when it comes to court systems as they used to, as we've really gotten to brain science. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying that I have the synesthesia thing that you were talking about, and it really makes you see things a lot differently than normal people would. And like growing up, I always thought that I was strange because everything had colors. And
Oh, don't get me, you're still strange. But in a good way.
It was really scary.
I imagine.
Yeah, and figuring that out, but nobody else did that.
Mhm.
It was.
So all the people that I've met, I've had a few students, right? You know, they are probably one of the more, and you're the same way. You asked a really good question in the class. They view the world differently. So how reliable then is sense perception if we know it could, you know, feel the seat underneath you. 98% of that at the molecular level is empty space. It's been proven scientifically that 98% of all atoms is empty space. The distance between the nucleus and any electron is vast and empty. And even the existence of electrons is fallible. The current theory, string theory, that connects electrons at the quantum physics level, the most recent theory is that they actually jump dimensions. And what we thought was revolutions around, because sometimes we saw them and sometimes we didn't, as those electrons spin around the nucleus like we always thought, now they're saying that sometimes they're there and sometimes they're not, and that they jump. They jump from atom to atom. They jump from dimension to dimension. That an atom, that an electron in an atom in your body right now could actually exist in an atom in a different dimension, which now they've proven there's about 11 and not just 4. So even the idea that the electron that you're supposed to be, because things never really actually touch, right? It's just a resistive force. That electron that you think is pushing on another electron might not even be pushing on any electron. So 98% of what you sit on and perceive as solid is empty. But yet we feel that every day, right? We walk around and we don't fall through things. So how reliable can that be, right? So we look at the reliability, we use the blurs when it comes to either our ways of knowing. We'll come back to the idea of love. I told you we come back to the idea of love and language. You use the word love, and it means something very different than the person next to you. And when you boil it down to the human condition, the idea of love in your brain being different than someone else makes the word love just a combination of sounds made from your voice box that we put together and have agreed upon to mean the same very, very general concept, all right? So now when we look at the blurs and apply them to language, language itself isn't reliable. Because Toni Morrison, she writes a book called The Bluest Eye. We're going to read it here in pretty soon in IB. You know, good people love in a good way. Bad people love in a bad way. Jealous people love in a jealous way. All those forms of love, they are forms of love for that person, but that love looks very different to you and I. But it's the same word. And we've covered this as we analyze literature and the arts, and we look at connotation versus denotation, and what did Fitzgerald really mean in Gatsby, right? We've covered those things. Just the idea of metaphor makes language obscure, all right? Now if we bring that to an area of knowledge like history, you know, the filter for which you receive historical facts comes through bias and subjectivity and limited knowledge and then questioning reliability. So if you're someone born in 1950 and you're writing a historical book about World War I, you're reading and understanding things from maybe second and third perspective, all coming through the subjective and biased human lens. That whatever you see, you interpret differently than what I see. So how then can historical facts in themselves ever be interpreted the same way? And therefore, how do we know that they're facts? All right? So that's how we apply the blurs to areas of knowledge and ways of knowing. Questions? I know I just throw a lot at you and your brain probably hurts just a little bit. All right? That chart on the back, that's for you and your group, an activity for you to do later, is you make knowledge claims about conformity and nonconformity and then talk about them. Did I talk in here about if you don't have a group yet? All right, last thing, guys. Very last thing, and then you can relax or talk to your group members about where you're headed with this. At some point, logistically, you have to start figuring out what group you're in, who you're with, what areas of knowledge you're going to cover, all right? What I want to say very lastly is if you are an outlier, if you don't have anyone for any group, or you and a friend are together but you can't find a third, email me. Email me your names and the situation. We'll gather those names on a Google spreadsheet and probably share it on my website for people to view and see who is out there that needs a group and get those people together, even if we've got to force it. All right? So if you don't have a group, I need to hear names soon so we can get you going. Because if you're really going to start thinking about everything that you're hearing and seeing in the sense of conformity and nonconformity and start gathering information for this project, you need to be on the same page with your group members about what areas of knowledge you're going to cover and what perspectives you're going to talk about. And those are conversations you guys can have face-to-face or via text or whatever. Any general questions about what we covered today, theory of knowledge, the project itself, logistics, anything? Anything right now before you go into this weekend and into next week? Because we're not coming back together as a group for a couple weeks when we do our next lecture. All right, guys, have a good weekend.